What was Nico LaHood like as a kid?
Well, I mean, uneventful. San Antonio all my life. I'm one of three boys. Pop is a lawyer, first generation here from Pop. My grandfather's from Lebanon. My mom grew up on the south side. She's from Laredo. She went to Harlandale High School. My pop went to Central Catholic, St. Gerard before that. Pretty uneventful, loving parents. Grew up in a very religious environment, Catholic and denominational, which is nothing wrong with that, but that was just our deal. And I went to Catholic school all my life, so I knew a bunch of rules. I didn't have a relationship with Christ. I could point him out to you, I just couldn't introduce you to him. So there's a difference. I think a lot of Christians can point out God and Christ, but can't introduce you to him because they really don't have a relationship themselves. And that was me. Went through high school, again, relatively uneventful, and then after high school is when things started getting exciting. I started working in nightclubs, running security, being involved with a lot of people, and I'm not proud of this, but I'm proud of who I am today. But I was arrested, and most people know my testimony. I was arrested for selling drugs. I was labeled, that was my first label in life. I was labeled a drug dealer or a criminal or whatever you want to call it. I've called a bunch of other non-PG words, but I won't say them this morning. There's ladies in presence. And so we received these labels, right? Well, 2 years later, after I'm working with that and dealing with that identity issue, and we all have identity crises at different seasons in our life. My brother on August 15, 1996 at 2:14 in the morning was shot in the face in my parents' driveway during a botched carjacking. And we walked out 4 minutes later. And so that was another struggle, another battle, another label of a victim, and we lived a victimized life. And I was a functioning angerholic for many, many years. Self-diagnosis, I never went to go talk to anybody. I was too machismo to go do that. But I was an angry person, and that anger turns into bitterness, and bitterness into rage. And you see that in people's lives, and I had that look, I had that spirit of strife and anger, and the world told me, I don't blame you. Right? The world has no answers for us, by the way, when you go through stuff in life. The world says, I don't blame you. We have a victim's mentality. We love to be victims. We search to be victims. If you're not a victim, someone will find a way to be a victim, and then we want to accentuate that victimization. And I always say this, and I've spoken to parents of murdered children. I've spoken to the Battered Women's Shelter, Great Crisis Center. I'm on 2 of those boards. I said, at some point, I'm not saying in a week, I'm not saying in a month, not even saying in a year or 5 years, but at some point a victim becomes a volunteer, right? You have to ask yourself why. For me, as a follower of Christ, Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is, right? So that means you'll never live beyond what you believe. So we all have to ask ourselves, what do we believe? And if you start realizing and start accepting and receiving what the world says about you or your circumstances, then you won't live beyond that.
So as you were 19, 20-year-old kid, young adult living there, so when you saw other people around you, how did you see them? I mean, coming that type of...
Before or after my brother's murder?
Well, during. You went. So the murder came after you were
my
arrested.
arrest. Right, I was arrested first, and then my brother's passing after that. I mean, it was very self-centered, obviously. I mean, I was a good person, right? Christ tells the rich young ruler, why do you call me good? And what's our definition of good? And the world's definition of good is obviously different than God's. And the world's definition of love is different than God's as well. And so I was living in the world's definitions of things. I'm self-serving, opportunistic. My definition, I'm a good person. And I was checking off some boxes that I had learned in my denominational walk or stumble or whatever it was back then. And so I looked at the world very self-serving, selfishly. What was in it for me, very defensively. After Mike's passing, it was very defensive. I mean, I always tell people, Matthew 22:37 is real. Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, strength, and what? Love your neighbor as yourself. So what does that mean? That means you can't give what you don't have. So I'm supposed to love you the way I love myself. Well, if you're asking me for $20, but I only have 10, I can't give you 20. I didn't have forgiveness. I didn't have mercy. I didn't have grace. I didn't have self-love. I didn't have that agape love. Didn't understand that. So I couldn't give people what I didn't have. I had anger, I had rage, I had justification. I had justification. I didn't recognize you with your beard on, man. You could see that. And so I couldn't give the world what I didn't have. And so that was it. It was a struggle. It was a real struggle. And you have that rage and bitterness. It's spiritual cancer. It really is. I mean, it'll eat you up. And then I lived that. So I looked at the world very differently, very defensively, not very service-minded, and I definitely wasn't a biblically minded man.
So was that, when Mike was killed, was that kind of a real low point then?
It was the lowest point.
Lowest point.
I mean, it was the lowest point. I mean, you walk out and you see your mom cry the way only a mama can cry. You see your pop cry for the first time. You load your brother's body on the gurney after they do the investigation and rigor mortis set in. and then you help your old man wash your brother's blood off your driveway, that'll mess you up. And then when you couple that in with the deception and the devil tapping on your shoulder, and then you have this this idea of what's going on, and this rage, and then this justification because the world tells you I don't blame you, well then you're going to live it out.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Yeah, so where was the turning, where did things start to turn for you?
I mean, I've heard that phrase, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. I mean, it's real. I think God used that anger, even though, I was mad at him, I was ticked off at God, but I grew up in a religious environment, so I didn't want to tell him what I really wanted and what I was thinking, so I held everybody else in contempt. But God's not freaking out. He's not freaking out like, what did you think about me? He's not freaking out, he knows everything, he's God. And I often tell this to people, and I hope you'll understand this, I'll explain it if you don't. Sometimes we have to forgive God to realize we never had to forgive him at all, right? Example is what I mean. Let's say my brother Shane, we studied together and I've gotten to know him. And let's say that he thinks I owe him $20, which I don't owe him $20, by the way. But let's say he thinks I owe him $20 and he's ticked off at me for that. But I don't. And I have proof that I don't. I paid him off and he signed a release or whatever, you want to say that? But he won't give me the chance to show that to him because he thinks I owe him $20, so he doesn't want to be around me. Nico, I don't talk to him. So he's going to have to come to a point, if he ever wants to know the truth, to forgive me, to realize, Shane, I paid you back, remember last year? Oh man, I totally forgot. So he's going to have to, in his mind, forgive me to realize he never had to forgive me, right? And so that's why I tell people, sometimes we have to forgive God because we don't understand why we have to suffer in this world. Because people think, if I'm a Christian and I don't suffer, it's the opposite. John 16:33, James 1:2-4, Romans 5:1-5. I love that our faith is not BSing us. I told Shane I wouldn't cuss, and I promise you I won't. It doesn't BS us, right? It doesn't. It prepares us for a tough world. We don't live in a PG-rated world. It's tough. And it's not going to be nice sometimes. And I love that Jesus is not a hypocrite. Our faith prepares us. John 11:35, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. In Matthew 26 in the garden, he's on his face praying. He felt sorrow. He was worried. And then he talked to the Lord and said, if you can take the cup. But he didn't, there's no question mark behind that, by the way. He made a statement because he knew his purpose. And so if you get sick and tired of getting sick and tired, I said, I want to meet this. I want to really know this guy that I've heard about all my life, the historical man Jesus. There's a historical Jesus, and then there's the Messiah Jesus. And so I studied the historical Jesus with my lawyer mind.
So you just started reading?
I just started reading, researching, studying, watching videos. I remember this, I'll tell you specifically, I was in the 290th District Court. I was representing a client. I'd already, I was succeeding in the world's definition of success, right? Building a practice, building a name for myself, making money, things of this nature, things that don't bring you the peace and the joy. Might bring you happiness, but not joy. And I remember representing this guy who had a son that was in the justice system also. And then his pop was in the justice system as well. And so, I realized, man, your kids will follow your example long before they follow your advice. And I said, man, my kids are screwed, man. They are. Not that I'm a bad person by societal standard, but what do I have to give my children? And I loved my children, and I wasn't even married, didn't have any kids yet. I loved the idea of my children. I knew that I loved them already. I loved the idea of family because I grew up Lebanese, Hispanic family, and the family is everything. And I said, I really need to get this together, and I was just tired of being angry all the time. And it was unpredictable, and people were like, you're so cool to hang around, but man, don't lose your cool around Nico, man, he's kind of nuts. And that was my defense mechanism, right? My anger was my defense mechanism.
Because you were a fighter. Did you take martial arts?
I used to train, I used to compete in martial arts, and which is why I just got shoulder surgery 4 or 5 weeks ago. So if I shake your hand soft, I promise you I don't normally do that.
He's not a wimp.
No.
He normally does that.
Yeah. So that was
you
it.
just started reading?
And started searching for a church.
Started coming alive to you?
Well, I wanted to understand it. There's a lot of people that memorize scripture, but if you don't understand it, it's different. James 1:22 says, don't just hear the word, do what it says. Because if you hear the word and don't do what it says, it's like looking at your reflection in the mirror and then walking away and forgetting what you look like. So I didn't want to just hear it, I didn't want to just read it, I wanted to understand it. We know that James 1:5 says, any man lacks wisdom, ask for it, and then you'll be given to abundantly. Well, what's wisdom? It's not just knowledge. Wisdom is knowledge plus understanding. You have to understand what you're knowledgeable of to be able to apply it, a practical, solving problem side of knowledge. And so that's what wisdom was for me. So I wanted to understand the Bible, and then my lawyer mind kicked in. I wanted to be able to defend my position. If I was going to follow this guy, Jesus Christ, I wanted to be able to litigate to people why. So when people ask you the why, you should be able to answer that. And so that was my journey, and that's why I lovingly challenge people, because Christians can't do that. You'd be surprised, and don't answer this for yourself, but when you leave here today, if someone asked you, why are you a Christian? What would you say? And don't say answer right now. I mean, I have my answer, and we can talk about that later if you want to, but why are you a Christian? Then secondly, okay, why should I be a Christian? Because we're called to be salt and light, I mean, right, Matthew 5. I mean, salt is a truth preserver back then in the ancient world, and then light is to illuminate dark situations. What do you lighten up dark situations with, and what are you trying to preserve? What truth? So that was my journey.